While many Hollywood creatives have gone on strike, hundreds of Christian fans, writers, teachers, and volunteers teamed in the hotel halls at last week's 11th annual Realm Makers Conference. They heard from keynote speakers like Steve Lobby, Stephen James, and Tricia Goyer about how stories should lead us to a sense of wonder. So we are asking conference newcomers and authors alike, which stories have helped you find wonder and worship of Jesus Christ? Welcome back to Fantastical Truth, the live and in-person at Realm Makers podcast from Lorehaven.com, in which we explore fantastical stories for God's glory. I'm E-Steamer Burnett, the slightly horsey-voiced host of the podcast. I'm also the publisher of Lorehaven and the co-author of the Pop Culture Parent.
And I'm Zackary Russell, but when I'm in costume at Realm Makers, my name is Philip. Yes, speaking of horses, I was the guy dressed as a horse, a very low-budget horse costume. I was portraying the horse that Edmund rides in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Not the book, but the movie. If you'll recall, Edmund says, "Whoa, horsey," and the horse gives his real name. And this is episode 171, How Did Christian Creators Seek Wonder at Realm Makers 2023?
It's a classic interchange beloved by fans the world over, and yet I did recognize it once Zach prodded me just a little bit. I am interested to say, yes, I knew what that reference was, and a few other people did too. But that's kind of the thing at Realm Makers. You know, you get people who are making these niche references and people who feel like they're maybe alone in the stories that they enjoy, particularly as Christian fans of these stories and Christians who are trying to create these stories. Zach, this year's Realm Makers event was, I think, the biggest yet. 10 years down, another 10 to go. This was the 11th annual event, and we're back at the familiar haunt of the Sheraton Westport Chalet in St. Louis. To me, that is the Hotel Realm Makers, just because we've been there so many times. And we may be bursting at the seams a little bit, but I think there were probably over 500 people at the book signing that's going on and starting to be taken down now, but lots of people storming in here to see their favorite authors, get some autographs. I actually helped to introduce a couple of people to an author whom they were a little nervous to talk to. Like, they came in and they were saying, we're looking for books by, I'll just go ahead and say a free plug here, books by Erin Phillips. We've happened to review one of her titles at Lorehaven, by the way. And I said, well, why don't you find her and ask her if she's here? And they said, well, that's actually her right over there. And I said, well, why don't you go and talk to her? And they got really, really celebrity shy there, in which case I just decided, you are now at the North Pole in the mall. It's Christmas time. That's Santa Claus. And I am the photographer elf. And I just went up and I made the introduction. And I don't know whether I made them nervous or made their night, but it's loads of fun to connect people in this way.
Stephen, I met with Tricia Goyer and spoke for a few minutes, and she made a really interesting comment about the homeschool crowd, which we've talked about a lot on this podcast. Homeschoolers like to meet the authors of the books that they enjoy. They don't just like to read the back cover copy or look at the website or go to social media. They like to meet these authors in person, and that was a really special and magical thing about tonight, that all of these authors are here that you as a reader can come talk to.
Several of the authors who were here, Zach, were the authors who were celebrating. Turns out they didn't know that they were going to win an award tonight. We'll actually save some of this discussion for our next episode, kind of a sequel to this one. But we had the Realm Awards banquet on Friday night. You can actually get all the news about that by going to Lorehaven.com. Turns out that the book of the year that they announced was a fantasy novel called Kalor from author J.J. Fisher, released last year. Lots of great nominations there. It also won in the fantasy category, Kalor by J.J. Fisher. The science fiction winner was Drawn in Ash by John Ott. And the horror, paranormal, and supernatural winner, you'll actually hear him coming up here. That's Infernal Fall by Brian Timothy Mitchell. We were able to get him to sit down, take a break from signing a bunch of books for folks. The debut novel winner was The Wickwire Watch by Jacqueline Hagan. The best young adult winner was The Wonderland Trials by Sarah Ella. We're hoping to have her on the podcast to talk about her next book coming up in a few months. Then the best middle grade winner was Iggy and Oz, The Living Snot by J.J. Johnson. That's like the most middle grade title that was ever middle graded. There was also a Reader's Choice Award, A Daughter of the Trolls by Mackenzie Catron. And the best audiobook winner was Dream of Kings by Sharon Hink, who's also been on the show. Short audio winner of Bitter Souls by Brian Augustin from the Untold podcast. Best novella, Through a Shattered Glass by Sarah Pennington. Best short story winner, I think she's coming up here on the show, is actually Love My Neighbor by Laura Van Arendonk-Baugh. And the best cover design winner, we'll have a cover designer later in here, but didn't win this time. But the best cover was a pretty epic one we've seen, because we've had Brian Timothy Mitchell's Infernal Fall in the sponsors before, and got a lot of love at the conference this year. The designer was designed by Damon Freeman /Damonza. So you can get all that info at lorehaven.com, but we'll spell that out a little bit more in our next episode. It's so much fun to do the costuming. It's fun to celebrate these stories. And it's fun to see the authors break down in tears, and almost inevitably, once they get dragged up to the stage to get their award, they say, I didn't know I was going to win an award tonight. And it's just so cool to see that humility but ambition at the same time. And I've no doubt we're going to hear that in some of the discussions that Zach's about to undertake.
Yeah. Stephen, this is also the second year in a row we have had a Realm Award winner from Australia. So Realm Makers is an international consortium, you could say. So that's really cool. And yes, it was great to see many of those authors get up and accept their award and really just give praise to their fellow authors, friends, beta readers and editors, but just the whole family aspect of it. At Realm Makers, you truly do see that humility.
Realm Makers, by the way, was sponsored by Enclave Publishing, which is also the top sponsor of this podcast. Their featured sponsorship this week is an anniversary release of a classic fantasy novel called The Light of Adon by Karen Hancock. Abram has dedicated the last 8 years of his life to becoming worthy to touch and tend the sacred flames of Adon, and he expects to be blessed for his devotion and sacrifice. But on the eve of taking the vows that will irrevocably separate him from the life he was born to, as Abram Caladorn, the fifth son of the king of Kirioth, he is betrayed by his spiritual mentor and sold into slavery by his brothers. Enclave Publishing presents a special hardcover edition of the Christie Award-winning Light of Adon. This is the first book in the Legends of the Guardian King series by Karen Hancock. It's available now wherever fantastic books are sold, and you can order now online or from your favorite bookseller. It's in hardcover, and it's also available in audiobook form from Oasis Audio.
We are going to move into a segment in just a moment where I sit down with several authors that we've been getting to know here at the Realm Makers Conference, but we're going to be asking them, how have you found wonder, and how has that led you to a truth? And so, Stephen, what have you been thinking about this? That was one of the themes from this conference, but tell us more about wonder and how you've discovered wonder.
Well, wonder as an emotion, I think, is one of those things like humility that if you start to look at it, it will jump from your focal point. It'll run off to the corner of your eye and you'll miss it. It's something I think that has to happen to you in the course of you pursuing something, or in this case, someone else. The way that I view that sense of wonder is it is an emotion that you get sometimes that you should learn to expect but also not chase. But you get that, like humility, only when you're pursuing the creator of all wonder, the source of all wonder, our creator, Jesus Christ. And yet Jesus also works in the world through natural beauties, like a sunset or some magnificent thing that even a person has made. A giant building can evoke wonder just as much as the Grand Canyon or the sight of a full moon on a clear night. I think that wonder is also something we can expect from fantastical stories. If we didn't have wonder, I doubt that we would be here. So I get a sense of wonder from coming to Realm Makers, like not so much like I'm looking at an aurora borealis or something, but I just see the image of Christ reflected in so many people who have so many dreams, who are often loving stories, quote, for their own sake, end quote, but not even really for their own sake. They are seeing something in a man-made story that is leading them to glorify the ultimate capital A author, Jesus Christ. And so they love stories for that reason, and they want to make more stories of their own for that reason. I love seeing that all gathered into one place. It is inspiring to see people who have often dedicated years and sometimes decades to the craft of making fiction, and then just being able to recognize these folks and celebrate their stories from the platform, even as we also celebrate other stories, like some by Christians and some by non-Christians, but all of them, I think, for the discerning heart, we can use and enjoy to give glory to Him.
I'm glad you mentioned God's creation. That was kind of the first thing that came to my mind. There's a photo I'm showing to you, but we can put this in the show notes. And it's this really interesting, creepy image of these kind of bare trees growing out of this blue soil in front of this orange sky filled with stars. Well, that's not actually what it is, but it's not a painting either. It looks like an alien planet, but it is a scene from the desert of southwest Africa in Namibia. It's a photograph taken by Franz Lanting, a National Geographic photographer from about 5 years ago. My friend Jason Crouch actually shared this recently, and his caption was, "This is not a painting." And this has gone viral now for a few years, so you may have seen this photograph. But the title of the photograph is Ghost Trees. And it's this really interesting effect where this photographer stood between these two giant sand dunes, and between the sand dunes was this kind of clay ground. That wasn't blue, and the sand dunes weren't exactly orange. What he did was he waited for the sun to go right over the dune and go all the way to the bottom of the dune, and then he took the photo before it could hit the ground. And so because of the way the light kind of filtered through there, the background, the sky looks orange and the ground looks blue. It's just the most fascinating photo. And, he was adamant, this is not photoshopped. This is the actual color that I saw through my lens. And it looks like you're looking at an alien planet. Well, that's our planet. and sometimes our own planet is that fantastical and wonderful. So when we think about creation, when we think about creativity, we first have to think about how creative God is, not just in this, desert scene, but the way that God arranges light and the way that he helps us figure out optics and things like that. But yes, human creativity, obviously on full display here at Realm Makers. So many amazing stories I got to hear about. So many amazing books that won the awards this weekend. And, Stephen, just a recent story I've been thinking about is That Hideous Strength, where it's toward the end of the book, chapter 15, chapter 17, The Descent of the Gods, I think is the chapter title. It's where the supernatural beings in charge of the solar system come to Earth and to kind of set things right and to kind of reunite a estranged couple, not to give away spoilers. But that entire scene, the way that Lewis describes that, just this otherworldly presence of these, basically angels, but described in such a way, it's like, is this an alien visitor? It's so strange. It's so foreign. It's like these ghost trees. It's something you just totally wouldn't expect. And I think that's kind of how I describe wonder. It's something you can't even fathom. Like, you don't have a category to put it in. You think it's just, with this photo, you think it's something fake. You think it's AI generated. The way that Lewis describes those supernatural beings at the end of the book, you're thinking, are they just asleep? Is this a dream they're having? Like, this is just too amazing to be real. I mean, of course, it's a story. But that's the kind of wonder that I love to feel in stories. And so it's going to be great to talk to some authors in a minute about how they've experienced that.
Well, Steve Lobby, who's been on the show before as a part of our Steve saga, he kicked off the event on Thursday by saying, "Let me tell you a story." And then he said, "Have I got your attention?" And then he talked about wonder. And then by seeming coincidence, Stephen James, who's also been on the podcast, but because he's sort of an honorary fourth Steve, he also talked about wonder, but with a bit of a different angle on that the next day. So again, two seeming coincidences that they both had the same idea, which makes me think something is going on. So thus the topic of our show today. Zach, I'm ready for those conversations that you're about to have, starting with our friend and Lorehaven staff creator, Marian Jacobs, because I think we all felt a little bit of a sense of wonder with some amazing news that we knew was going on behind the scenes, but that as of last week, we were finally able to start telling our friends all about. So now she's going to get to tell you, I've no doubt. So let's sit back and listen to that conversation.
Well, I am joined now by staff writer for Lorehaven.com, Marian Jacobs. And you're our first guest today, so welcome, Marian.
Thank you.
It's been great to enjoy another Realm Makers here in St. Louis. And we are talking this weekend all about wonder. So what have been some things in God's creation or human creations that have led you to a sense of wonder?
Such a great question. Lately, I think I've just been spending a lot of time contemplating, I think, just God's work and the way he's just surprises me by answering prayer, I think, and I hope that's not too far off the mark to say how he has, brought me through some pretty deep valleys lately, and then you get to the end of it, and he just has blessings upon blessings to heap upon your head. And one of those things has been after, I would say, like a particularly difficult season personally, and with my family. I ended up having a book contract with B&H, which is an imprint of Lifeway. I'm going to be writing a book on biblical discernment guide for fictional magic. So it'll be like a type of theology of magic aimed at the church, parents, readers, writers, maybe even gamers. Very heavy on theology and trying to be as true to Scripture as possible, and just wanting to really, honor the Lord and everything. So I think that's really just been so huge. It honestly, I know that sounds strange to say that's what I've been like in awe of lately, or that's what's inspired wonder, but really, after a very long season to have God be like, I have this for you to do, is just like, me? Really? You want me to write this? It is awe-inspiring. Yeah. So.
Well, I love that your story is about the work of God's timing.
Yeah.
Usually when we think of His creation, we think of things that are spatial, that are composed of matter.
Right.
But God created space-time.
Yeah.
So He knew the exact moment that this contract would happen for you, and He knew everything that was leading up to it, and so He arranged that in this perfect timing. I love in Psalm 139 how it says, all the days written about me are in your book, and you know all of them before one of them comes to be.
Yeah.
I'm paraphrasing. But just the idea that our lives are a book, and that God has written before we were born, and He knows every page of that book. And so He knew all the pages of your life, and so that's His creation.
Yeah.
His creation is the time that all this unfolds.
Yeah, and I think, honestly, frequently, of course, I'm always in awe of God's creation, every day. But honestly, that's probably a pattern almost in my thinking, to be just struck by God's timing, just struck by His sovereignty, and how these, you have these like very low moments that are juxtaposed against another moment that seems to parallel it, but is yet so wonderful, so full of blessing that you realize, oh, that's why that happened. And the timing and his plan fills me with wonder, absolutely, over and over again. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So from that sense of wonder, what is a truth that He has led you to?
I hope this doesn't sound too cliche, but again and again, trust in the Lord, trust in Him above others. Like, I am not putting my trust in other people. I am putting my trust in the Lord. I hope that other people, even as I write this book, I hope that they are not putting their trust in me to be able to accomplish this task, which feels really big to me and really too big for me. But I hope that they're putting their trust in the Lord. And I think even in each of these situations that I'm referring to, I'm realizing that like those seasons of waiting, those seasons of hardship, each and every single one of those just like bolsters my faith, bolsters my trust in Him. And there was a time back while my husband and I were dating, where we kind of talked about how we had kind of grown this idea of like, put your trust in God, as kind of like this cliche, like what does that even mean? But then we got married, and we went through hardship after hardship. Actually, even before we got married, there was this horrific car accident in which he almost died. He'd been in the hospital like multiple times as we like in the early years of our marriage, and it was just like God like puts you through these things, and you realize this is nothing about this is cliche. This is just the nuts and bolts of the Christian life. is you must walk in faith and trust him that he is going to provide, even when it feels like your life is hell.
You can only really trust God in the valley and in the waiting.
Mm-hmm.
When you're not in the valley, when you're on a mountaintop experience, you're just in a normal, average, everyday life, you're not really having to trust God.
Right.
You know, there's no need to trust him about anything because you can just trust yourself and kind of get through life on your own. It's when you're having to wait.
Yep.
And it's when you're in pain.
Yeah.
That's really where your trust is put to the test.
Right.
It's where you find out if you really do trust him, if you really do trust his timing. But that's so true, Marion, that we can't put our trust in other people because everyone else is just as limited as we are.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
As much as we have our heroes and our superheroes, they're not superpowered. And no one can see beyond time the way that God can.
Yeah.
So, of course, he's the only one we should trust. It's easier said than done. Because really what it means to trust him in those valleys or in those waiting periods is to acknowledge that someone else knows something you don't. Mm-hmm. But that really does give a sense of wonder, though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because it's true.
It's true.
Yeah.
It is true. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and he's the God that, like I said, we're not putting our trust in others, we're putting our trust in him. And I've been challenged recently, too, to make sure that I'm not underestimating people around me. I'm not thinking of others in a way that says, like, they are incapable of something. Because I believe that God can use someone from any background to do amazing things. So, yeah, just continuously being in awe of what he can do with me and what he can do with people around me. So yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing all that, and congratulations on the book Contract.
Thank you.
I think it's going to be a wonderful resource for our listeners when it comes out.
Yes,
we'll keep
so
everyone
excited.
posted.
Thanks, Zach.
Thanks. All right, now we're going to talk to Rochelle Nelson, who I just met here at Realm Makers. She's the author of Sky of Seven Colors, a debut novel coming out on August 8th from Enclave Publishing. Rochelle, what are some things that make you feel a sense of wonder?
Oh, so many things. I feel like people are going to think that I'm going to talk about color because my book is about a colorless world that kind of runs into our world that does have color and the wonder that instills. But I'm actually would rather talk about language. And so, you and I were talking a little bit earlier about Stargate and how we're both fans, except you like the grittier, darker stuff, and I like the light, fluffy, cheesy stuff. But yeah, I always loved in the movie how it really explores language and kind of how languages might develop from the ancient times on like another planet, and it was very realistic. And then the series came out and they just decided without any explanation that every single humanoid in the whole galaxy would speak English without any reason for it. But I love studying languages. I'm not super fluent in anything. I speak a little bit of Spanish. But I really believe that language is culture and language is a miracle from God. So think about like the fact that we have these images in our head. We have these thoughts in our head. And then we are able to use symbols because that's all words are, right? They're a symbol for a thought or a concept or a reality. And we're able to make a sound symbol. And then the other person that you were talking to is able to pretty clearly picture, when you're communicating well, exactly what is in your brain. It's like telepathy if you think about it. It's insane. And I've even heard some linguists say that it is one of the best apologetics for the existence of God, because we really don't understand evolutionarily how humans developed language. Like, it's so complex, it shouldn't even exist.
Yeah. You know, I don't get into the young earth, old earth creation debate a whole lot. I kind of sit the fence on some things, but the Tower of Babel really does seem like the most logical and scientific explanation for the existence of whatever 6,000 languages that we have now. Because you think about how in the world did that many people agree for that long with no apparent origin of that agreement on how a language should work. Right, and how the vocabulary, the grammar, and just the cadence and the style, and then, of course, the written side of the language. How did any of that develop? And I would love it if we had some archaeologists or linguistics historians or whatever it is in our audience that would tell us about that. But you're right, just learning that sense of language is a sense of wonder. My very first time to travel to another country was a little over 20 years ago. I went to China. And I remember just walking down the street, looking at all the signs for all the shops, and in this totally foreign language that I had no clue how to speak or read or understand. And I'm like, everyone around me understands this.
It's so crazy.
I'm the only one that doesn't understand this.
Yeah.
It's normal to them. And for some reason that just blew me away. Like, how do they understand? Oh, they've always known this. Learning that language was also very magical because there are these Chinese characters that have very close tie-ins to biblical stories.
Yep.
My favorite one is the character for the word righteousness. It's 2 parts. The top part is the character for lamb, and the bottom part is the character for me. So a lamb covers me, and that means righteousness.
Wow.
Yeah, that was the very first Chinese word I learned. And I would show that to people because they'd say, well, why should I believe in the Bible? It's a Western thing. Why should I believe in Jesus? He's American. Well, no, he's not American. He's born in Israel. He's Middle Eastern. But why should I believe in this, non-Asian religion? Well, maybe it's not as far away as you think. Maybe God has put this little Easter egg in your language so that you would think about it. And I don't know why that is there. You tell me why that character is there.
Totally.
And just, there's plenty of little Easter eggs like that in their language. But even aside from that, just the meaning of each character. I mean, I think you have to learn something like 1,000 Chinese characters because it's not phonetic. It's pictorial. You have to learn like 1,000 of them to read the newspaper. I think there's 5,000 of them. I forget how many. And I'm like, how do people learn this?
Yeah.
But more than that, how do we have brains where people can learn that, and not just as a first language, but as a second or a third language? Like, isn't that amazing how God created us to learn that?
Yes, and yet there's something that will always be special about the language of your heart, the first one that you learned. And this is how good God is that at Pentecost, he gave them the gift to speak in tongues so that each person would hear the gospel in their own language. I just think that's one of the most beautiful miracles. And so I guess that story really inspired in my book, The Gray Earth, that's a portal fantasy. So our main character travels to the Gray Earth. And it's kind of a bit of a utopia, not for her, but maybe for the people who live there, with a dark undercurrent going on, kind of some secret things that are happening that people don't know about. But because things are set up in a way that's supposed to bring peace and unity, the giver of gifts in this world gave them this beautiful gift of language. So each person hears other people talking in their own heart language. And so it was really fun writing it because our character, who's a human, goes there. And so she's hearing things in her heart language. Like, for instance, there's a city, and it's named after the concept of a North Star. That's the meaning of it. Now, who knows what other people hear when they hear that, but because that's the concept, she hears the name Polaris, because that is the word for North Star in American English. And there's various things like that, but then she runs into things that she has no concept for, right? Like, there's strange beasts in that world, and there are foods that she doesn't recognize that she wouldn't have any word for. And so I got to make up really fun words from ancient dialects from the 2 different races. And they each have like a unique sound and a unique etymology that's recognizable, I hope. And so that was really fun to get to create. But I really believe that language carries culture. So for instance, like, I speak a little bit of Spanish, and in English, when we say how old we are, we say I am this many years old. M as in identity. When Spanish speakers say how old they are, they say, I have this many years, as if it's a possession or a treasure. And so in our American Western culture, we are very focused on personal identity. But in Latin culture, they are very focused on community and family, and they really honor their elders in a way that we don't necessarily understand in our culture. So to say, I have this many years, as if it's an honor. like I've collected them up and it's a good thing, whereas we don't necessarily look at aging as a good thing. And so to speak in somebody else's language is to take on a little bit of their identity and to give up a little bit of your identity. And so you see that played out in my story, and that is why I love that God extends himself to speak to us in each one of our languages, and he does that to this day. I love the ministries that I just believe the Holy Spirit has inspired that translate the Bible into hundreds and I don't even know how many languages. And the Holy Spirit, that still small voice, it speaks to us each in our heart language. So it's not you have to learn Aramaic. I mean, I'm a Gentile, I'm not a Jew, so I'm grateful that the Lord speaks to me in English, and I can understand it in a way that he created me. So it's amazing.
Yeah. My wife grew up in Oahu, Hawaii.
Oh,
and there is a Hawaiian language that's been around for a long, long time. But then there's also a pidgin. So it's sort of like a Creole
Yes,
mixture.
I've heard this.
Mm-hmm. And there is a pidgin Bible. And it's a wonderful thing, and it's really funny, and it's very endearing, but it really is a language. I wish I could quote it from memory, but I encourage our listeners to check it out. It's a really fun language. Back to this idea of your world and your story, of the sky of seven colors, a world of gray scale and color coming in this world. We talked earlier. It reminded me of that movie Pleasantville.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen that in a long time, but can you remind me what exactly happens in that movie?
You know what? I haven't seen it since I was probably grade school, which I don't even know if it was appropriate for me to watch when I was in grade school. So it's hard to remember, but I think it's like this black and white kind of 1950s utopia, but the grayness kind of represents in that movie, and this is not similar to my book at all, just like a lack of emotion. Like people are just following the status quo, they're following the storyline that's already written for them, and this guy from our world travels into their world and starts shaking things up, and when they start to get a sense of autonomy and personal identity outside of the script, they become colorful.
Okay.
And maybe that subconsciously influenced me. I tend to think I was maybe a little influenced by The Giver, which also has that aspect where they don't see color when they're under those certain medications that keep them from feeling the depths of their emotions. And then also I love The Wizard of Oz, and so that's one too where Kansas is black and white. But mine's a little bit different. I love magical creatures, and I love stories where magical creatures come to our earth and they're just so different and they're prized and amazing. And I thought, well, what if the human was the magical creature that was magical somewhere else? And I thought, what would be intrinsically just amazing about our world that we take for granted every single day? And so it's color. And so they're fine without color. They're not lacking anything, but they do have an interesting magic system. And color is kind of hacks their magic system and interacts with it in ways that create new powers. And so it's an extremely coveted artifact for them. Even a little scrap of fabric that has color on it that came from our earth would be priceless. And so then here comes this human that has red blood running in their veins, and political intrigue and royal intrigue ensues, and she gets wrapped up in it. So.
Well, and imagine if you have freckles, then you've got all kinds of color all over your face. So that's interesting. Now it's interesting. Sky of seven colors. I joke with my kids a lot. I only see seven colors. A shirt is blue or green or red, and I'll put on a blue shirt with blue shorts, and I'm like, hey, it's all blue, and they're like, no, that's teal and that's turquoise, and that doesn't really work, or that's red and that's maroon. Those don't go together. I'm like, it's just red. You
would get along great with the gray people because they're fascinated by color. And I have one character, and he's a real nerdy kind of scientist. He wants to write a book about the colorful earth, but he can't get the color concepts quite down. It's not very precise for him. So red is brown and brown is red. Everything in that spectrum is just red. Orange is red. Everything's red. They just don't understand.
Yeah. And then there's the kids that had the crayons with the 250 crayon packs, the kids that love every different little color. So if I was a bomb technician and they're like, cut the emerald wire, I'm like, is that the green one or the green one?
I sent out a quiz to my subscribers on my email list that has a test like that, where it asks you all the weird names of colors, where it's like, is this lapis or lavender? And it's really hard. I only scored a 65%, and I was like, let me know if you get a higher score. And almost everybody emailed back and they got a higher score. So apparently I don't know what I'm talking about with colors.
Well, I mean, we've seen so many memes like that. Like, remember the dress? It's like, is this blue and black or gold and white?
Gold and white, yeah.
Yeah, and then there's other ones where it's like, which color do you see first? And it's like about if you're left-brained or right-brained. And we've had a lot of fun with stuff like that with my family. So color is an amazing thing that God created, and it's I can't imagine a world without it, but it would be kind of fun to introduce that to a new world.
Yeah.
So this sounds like a great story, Rochelle. I can't wait to see it, and congrats on publishing it. And it's great to share that sense of wonder. So
thank you so much, and I love everything that you guys do at Lorehaven, and I really do love the discussions about wonder and magic from a Christian worldview. I love reading your magazine, so thank you for having me on.
And where can our listeners find you online?
My main platform is Instagram, and you can find me at rochelle.nelson.author. I'd love it if you'd sign up for my email newsletter, which you can do at the links in my bio, or you can go to rochellenelsonauthor.com, and Rochelle is spelled Rachelle.
Great. We'll have those links in the show notes. Thanks, Rochelle.
Thank you so much.
Sorry, Zach, I hate to interrupt, but we've got to introduce our second sponsor for this episode, which is perfectly matched for the whole Realm Makers idea, because it's E.J. Kitchens. Looking for a fun yet challenging writing class for your teen or yourself? I Write, How to Write a Novel is a brand new online writing course that will teach you how to write novels that your friends and even strangers will want to read, how to overcome writer's block and gather ideas, and much more. I Write is taught by E.J. Kitchens, a professional copywriter, former college lab instructor, and award-nominated author of the Star Clock Chronicles and Magic Collectors books. I Write is 30 weeks long, and for any homeschoolers looking for a language arts credit, it is worth 1 credit. For more information and to enroll before the August 15 start date, visit E.J. Kitchens' website at ejkitchens.com/courses. Of course, we'll have all those links in the show notes for the I Write course, as well as our top sponsor, The Light of Adon by Karen Hancock.
All right, I am sitting now with Donovan Bergen, and this is his first Realm Makers. So it's really cool to meet with you. We've had some other conversations here, but a big theme, as you may have seen this weekend, is wonder.
Right.
So things that give you a sense of wonder, things in creation, things in stories, things in human culture and creation. So what have been some things that have come to mind that give you that sense of wonder?
Well, I think specifically at this conference, I drove in Saturday morning and was kind of exhausted but having a real good time. And oddly enough, it didn't dawn on me till that afternoon as I was sitting and talking with other people here at Realm Makers that, hey, I'm here at a convention with people who are in love with science fiction, fantasy, and Jesus Christ. And I was like, wait, I am surrounded by my tribe, you know? And there's something powerful about that, and I think that's what we get when we're in church or when we're interacting with the community. And it was just a special moment of realizing that. And then in some of the moments between what we were doing here and some of the breaks we had, I had a run-in with a couple who was not part of the conference, and they just asked me what I was doing. And I talked to them about this conference, about it was a Christian conference, and they opened up about their faith. They prayed over me, and I got to pray over them. And it was just another moment of connection and with other individuals and with God at the same time. And it was just, to me, those are the wonderful moments.
That's amazing. I love that you found your tribe. C.S. Lewis says that we read to find out we're not alone. And because you read a character and you're like, hey, he's kind of like me.
Yeah.
You know, or she's kind of like me, or she's like my friend, or he's kind of like my relative. Like I'm not alone, or he sees the world the way I see the world.
Yes.
You know, okay, I'm not crazy.
Yes.
And you come to Realm Makers and you're like, okay, you can like spaceship stories and dragon stories and still love Jesus,
Yeah, absolutely.
and you're not alone.
Yeah.
So what have been some stories that you've enjoyed over this past year, or even recently, or that you've heard about at Realm Makers that you just said, wow, I gotta see that story, or I just gotta watch it again, or I gotta tell people about that story?
Right. Well, I think specifically here at Realm Makers, there's just a whole lot of stories that I've been hearing about. I think I just piled my bag of brand new books that are I'm going to go home and tear through and have a great time with. Some of the books that I have really enjoyed this year, The Reason for God by Tim Keller, as I just started that a couple weeks ago, and it's just been amazing to read through that. I think Names of God by The Power of the Names of God by Tony Evans have been another really good book. So yeah, I tend to get into a lot of nonfiction and fiction, and it's just been a really good year of reading and a really good year of marveling at what God can do in our lives.
It is amazing how many names God is known by.
Yeah.
So what are some of your favorite names of God?
Oh man, that is a good question. Especially highlighted in that book, it's like chapter after chapter of just revealing. It's more about, for me, learning more about God's character through some of those situations, right? And I think that one of the things that resonated well with me that I hadn't resonated well with before was when David was facing Goliath, right? He calls on the Lord as his protector and his warrior, and he says, God is holy, God is my protector, God is my warrior. Why would I be afraid of this challenge before me? You know, and I think there are so many times in my life, in my wife's life, in our lives together, that we've faced this seemingly insurmountable challenge. And each time, God has proven himself to be bigger, greater, and more sufficient than that challenge. So really just resonating with some of those stories in a different way and realizing how they connect with your life is just a great experience.
I love that. So that's you're segueing perfectly. My next question is how do these moments of wonder lead you to biblical truth? You know, the name of God that I think about a lot is Prince of Peace. So it's almost a contrast, right? You think of a prince, I think of The Prince by Machiavelli, right? Not a nice guy.
Yeah. So yeah, I think of Prince, the artist formerly known as.
Right.
Yeah, definitely different.
Yeah,
different kind of prince.
Or you think of a spoiled brat prince, you know, son of the king that just kind of inherits everything, doesn't work for anything, lazy, entitled, you know, and doesn't want to rise to the occasion of the kingdom. A lot of stories about that. So yeah, we have a lot of different pictures of prince, but a prince of peace. So someone that is ruling, but that is bringing peace at the same time. You think of someone that's ruling, it's usually through force or some kind of trickery. You know, we have so many books and stories about dystopian worlds and kind of authoritarian leaders. My oldest daughter right now is reading 1984.
Oh, wow.
So we got Big Brother.
Yes.
Not a nice prince. So a prince of peace. So someone that brings peace collectively, but individually as well. Like Jesus is the prince of our hearts that brings peace. That's a wondrous thing, and the truth that leads me to is that I don't have to worry so much about human princes, because first of all, they all die, or they have very limited time spans for ruling, and ultimately there is a higher prince that's in charge of all these things, and I can put my trust in that.
Right.
And that can help me kind of navigate this world and not be so concerned about it. Which, of course, we're getting politics shoved in our face all the time. So it's very easy to slip into that. There's a bad guy in charge of the world, and then the tables are turned.
Right.
You know, and a good guy comes into power. And, you know, that story over and over again, it shows us that God is ultimately bringing things under his control.
Yes.
And so, like with David and Goliath, you know, Goliath seems like the guy in charge. Until he's not.
Yeah.
Until he's very much not in control.
Right.
He's not even in control of the location of his head in relation to his neck.
No. And all it took was for one boy to have faith in what God could do.
Mm-hmm.
Not even himself, but what God could do. And that overcame Goliath, you know? And we always face those Goliaths in our own lives. And I think it's great to realize it's not by our power. So when we feel too weak, we are too weak, but he is strong. And so that's, I love that.
Yeah. So what do you hope to trust God for or experience his wonder through this year?
Well, I think there's quite a few ways. I think one of the things that I really appreciated or got out of this Realm Makers, Tricia talked a lot about how God directs your life, right? And how he may call you into something that takes you away from what you really want in the moment because he knows what you need. And she talked about releasing her authorial journey to the Lord, the author of our lives, right? And so for me, it was this moment of, you know, I've been learning, how do I surrender my family? How do I surrender my children? And for me, this year, and it's pretty much every year for me, is how do I surrender my pride? How do I surrender my desire for the attention to be on me? You know, and so it was just God kind of revealing that in my heart as she was speaking those words and realizing I need to make that surrender. And so that was just incredibly freeing and powerful for me. And I hope that I can continue to follow that throughout the year and just kind of surrender, hey, God, what do you want for me on this writing journey? What do you want for me in my free time and things of that nature?
I love that. God really is our ultimate author. And I'm sure he's working from an outline. I'm sorry, pantsers, people who write by the seat of their pants, discovery writers, whatever you want to call yourselves. A lot of those at Realm Makers. But God is an outliner, I'm convinced, because he saw the end from the beginning. And but yeah, he is the author of our lives and the book that he makes about each one of our lives. And so if we trust that, it makes the journey of going through that book a lot more fun.
Yes, it does.
And a lot more enjoyable. So those are some great thoughts, Donovan. And thanks for joining us today on the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me.
All right, I'm sitting now with Brian Weaver. He is a writer of epic fantasy. And he's been coming to Realm Makers for a couple years now. He'll tell us about that and why he discovered Realm Makers. And Brian, you've also been a very supportive listener of our show. I appreciate all the ways that you share about our show with others, and I'm glad it's provided value to you. But so why don't you tell us first, how did you find out about Realm Makers, and how did that kind of enter into your world?
Well, I was talking about writing with a bunch of people at church, and one of them happened to mention that her daughter worked for one of the flash fiction publishers, I think it's Havoc, and she mentioned Realm Makers, and I'm going, who is this group I've never heard of? And instead of getting the weird looks from people at church when I talk about writing fantasy, I walk in here and mention what I'm writing, and everybody just nods and says, oh, yes, I've done something similar.
Oh, dragons and wizards and
like,
spaceships, okay.
I don't feel like such a freak around here. It's like, you know.
Yeah. Sorry, tell me more. That's cool. So this is your second one to come to?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So a big theme this week has been wonder.
Yeah.
What have been the things that make you feel wonder, that point you to God, that point you to some truth that you find in the Bible? So let's just talk about stories or even God's creation. What are some things that make you feel wonder?
Well, I was really intrigued by the launch of the Webb Space Telescope.
Oh, yes.
And I always am amused by the reaction of the secular community with regard to that, because they're so obsessed with looking for someone out there to give them justification, when everything that it points to reminds me of the scripture that says, the heavens declare the glory of God. And if all of the universe is empty of all life except for God, and the earth is the only place where humans are, that just demonstrates how big God is compared to humanity. And instead of making me feel insignificant, it makes me feel amazed that humongous, immense, omnipotent God would deign to come down and live as a man and sacrifice himself for a sinner like me. It just boggles the mind.
Yeah. Man, I was so excited for the James Webb to launch. And I nearly had a panic attack when some micrometeorite hit it.
Oh, yeah, that must be terrible.
And they found some little holes, and I'm like, no, we've all waited so long to see this thing work. But yes, you're right. Psalm 8, when I consider the stars, the moon, the work of your hands, and the psalmist says, what is man? Does he end there?
No.
No, he says, what is man that you
you're
are mindful
of him?
And you're right. The secularist stops with what is man. Oh, what is man compared to all these stars? And there's kind of two ways that the secular worldview takes you. It's, what is man? We're just nothing but dirt, and there's nothing special about humanity. We're born, we die, and that's it. And there's just eventually the heat death of the universe. So nothing special. It's all just atoms and molecules. Or there's we're made of stardust, and it's so special. Isn't that cool? You're made of a star? Well, okay. That doesn't really tell me anything about a transcendent nature that we all feel.
I keep hoping beyond hope that one of these days they're going to look at some distant planet and God will have spelled out on the surface of that planet, I am. And see how they try to spin that to say, no, don't read too much into that.
Yeah, I was talking to someone today earlier about, I think this might have been Carrie Neat's sci-fi author. He was saying that the expectation with the James Webb Telescope is that as they look further and further away, you're looking further back in time, and what they expected to find was just these kind of blurry almost, or just not very well organized galaxies. Mm-hmm. Just kind of clumps of, maybe not even stars, but just dust and clouds and whatever, radiation. But what they're finding in the very distant edges of our universe is these fully formed, very well organized, spiral galaxies.
It doesn't fit their presuppositions at all.
Right. So how did those, it's like, how did those form when they should have taken a lot longer to form? And I don't know, but I love those moments where a discovery upends a theory that's based on an assumption of there being no God.
Yes. When you start with a false assumption, it's going to lead you down some weird paths that don't lead you to the truth.
Yeah. But, back to Psalm 8, what is man that you are mindful of him? God knows the name of every star in every galaxy that he also knows the name of.
And every soul on earth.
And he knows all of our names, and he knows all of our stories. When I was in college, I had a roommate, and I think we both had really early morning classes, and I was struggling to get up for these 8 a.m. engineering classes. And my roommate John said, well, why don't you pray for God to wake you up in the morning? I'm like, well, okay. I guess I could try that. I've got an alarm clock, or I could leave the blinds open. And he's like, well, why don't you just pray? I'm like, is that silly though? And he's like, well, it sounds silly, right? Like you're asking God to be your alarm clock, but he knows who you are and he cares about you. Like he's not too busy for you.
That's almost as dangerous as asking God to give you patience, because you wanted him to give you patience, but you don't know how he's going to do it.
Right. Yeah. So he might wake you up an hour early and you can't go back to sleep, but he wants you to use that time to pray or read the Bible or, just enjoy his creation sometimes. I always joke, if he wanted me to enjoy the sunset, he would have put it an hour later, because I'm not a morning bird. I am a night owl. So
yes, definitely.
I like to explore his creation through the stars in the darkness of the night.
Totally.
So what are some other things that make you have that sense of wonder from a story? Either a story you've read or the movie you've watched, particularly if it's a story that you found through Realm Makers.
Well, I'm always amazed by the different viewpoints that some different people come to this by looking at the same thing I see and see it from a totally different perspective, and shift my thinking by hearing what they're looking at and going, I never thought of it that way. Just because I think of it one way doesn't mean it's the only way to think of it, and it's like it's helped shift me in ways that I never would have expected. So when I never believed in myself, all the people coming and saying, you can do this. If God wants you to do this, he'll help you do this. So do it. And so if I know, I don't want to be the servant that gets to the end and God says, take his talent away from him and give it to the one who has 10. I want to hear, well done, good and faithful servant. I see all these people using the talent that God gave them to serve Him in creative fiction, in art, in podcasting, and why not join in that crowd and do likewise?
I love the whole fact of finding different things in the same story.
Yeah.
Because everyone's different and God kind of wires us differently. That's really cool. I mean, we are the body of Christ, and we're all different parts of the body, different expressions of the body. And, that's something that we often find through our book quests that we do through the Lorehaven Guild, our Discord server. We have these kind of chapter-by-chapter questions. Everyone kind of chips in and chimes in with their thoughts about a book, about a story, about its meaning. And it's really cool just to read through all those answers and just see the different ways that a story is really touching someone and kind of how it connects with them. Much more positive than just reading Amazon reviews from just total strangers.
Yes, definitely.
With weird names, and you wonder if they're robots or not. Everyone in our Lorehaven server, as far as we know, certified human, organic. But it's really neat to share a story with people. Reading is such an individual thing that we do. It's easy to just get locked into, these are the books I'm reading, and they don't involve anyone else. But that's the beauty of a conference like this. You find all these people that love these stories, and you get to enjoy them together and enjoy the different experiences of those stories together.
It's especially interesting when I talk to somebody who have read the same book that I have, and they look at me and says, well, I got a totally different view on that. It spoke to me in this way, and it's similar to when I read the same scripture that I've read dozens of times before, and suddenly something leaps out of it that I've never noticed. And it's like, wow, it's like, how did I miss that?
I mean, that's just the truth that God's Word is living and active. Through all the stories that we're telling, we are trying to reflect that back. Just the importance of words and language and stories, because God told us stories. But, His stories and His words are so powerful because they come from the creator of all these galaxies. And you're right, like you never get tired of reading God's Word, because it's not old, stale, dead, language. It's not just a human creation. It's a divine creation that He used humans to create. And that's the amazing thing too about Realm Makers, is that God is using all of these people here to make these stories, to share them with others, to portray attributes of God, portray His truth. He's put these stories into all these people here.
That's amazing too.
Yeah. So not only does He know our stories, He's creating stories through us for other people to enjoy together.
And He may end up telling me to write a similar story to somebody else, but even if you gave all of us the same assignment, each story would come out different, because we're different people and have had different experiences. So He can speak to different people through all of us, saying the same thing. We were made by a creative God, and we share in some of His creativity.
Yeah.
It gives you chills.
Yes. So, Brian, where can our listeners find some of your stories?
Well, I just set up a new website that hopefully I'll get looking a little bit better at brianweaver.net, and mainly to set that up to force myself to write more, to put more stuff out there so people don't show up at the website and say, that's it. And the plan is to hopefully have something to pitch here at the 2024 Realm Makers, and then talk to Kirk about getting the cover made.
Okay. Well, we'll be talking to Kirk later. He's a great guy. I'm looking forward to that. And that's Brian with an I, by the way. So brianweaver.net. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Brian. It's great to meet you in person.
I was glad to be here.
It's wonderful. So thank you. All right. I am talking here with Kirk DuPont from Dog-Eared Design. So if you look at the Realm Awards on the Realm Makers website, or a lot of different publishers that are represented here, you will have probably seen one of the book covers that Kirk has designed. So what have been some stories that have given you a sense of wonder?
I'm thinking like Steelfire from the Gods is what I'm looking at right now.
Oh, I love that cover.
Oh, thank you.
I saw it and said, shut up and take my money.
It's a good story. Yeah. Yeah. In fact, I just read, they give me like a couple pages of marketing and to give me a feel. And I just read the first 2 sentences, and I'm like, oh, I'm not reading this because I don't want any spoilers. And I just read the manuscript, but that was good. There was a lot of hope in it. Yeah, it's a dystopian book, AI taking over the earth, sort of thing. Yeah.
But that's why we read dystopian, because we want to know, even in the craziest, most evil takeovers of planet Earth, there's still hope, right?
Right. And that came through in the story, because actually the character was a bit of a nihilist, and that changed at the end.
That's
so there
cool.
was an arc. Yeah, so there was definitely hope.
That's great.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a reoccurring way to give you a sense of wonder. It's like there's something more powerful than the evil and the darkness that we see in the world.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
What are some other stories that you just enjoy reading, listening to, watching, that just make you go, wow, how did they do that? Or that was amazing.
Right. Well, I'm a visual guy, and there's some stories like the latest Lord of the Rings is the first thing that came to mind when you asked that. I'm disappointed with the story side of it, but
Oh, the Rings of Power?
yeah,
show?
but it's so beautiful.
Okay.
Everything about the visuals is right on. I'm a little disappointed in some of the story aspects, but man, they did such a good job. It's beautiful. I could just turn the sound off and just watch it.
That's cool. I remember when they first teased that show,
Yeah.
there was just an image of someone standing in front of a tree with some city or castle in the background. And That was it.
Right.
And within like minutes, all of the Lord of the Rings nerds like figured out where it was. And then they figured out what it's going to be about and what age it's set in and kind of some of the major story. And I was amazed at that.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Like
Me
how
too.
did people know
Oh,
what that
yeah.
image was?
Right.
But it was produced so well.
Yes.
So yeah, that is pretty incredible. I felt that way with I haven't watched Rings of Power, but I've watched the Wheel of Time TV adaptation also on Amazon.
Right.
And yeah, same thing. A lot of the story elements didn't love. A lot of the changes didn't love. But man, there were definitely some scenes that were just blew me away.
Yeah.
Like they go into some cities. And it's just like, wow.
Yeah, they create entire worlds. Yeah, like the Dead City.
Yes, J.R.R. Lagoth. Yeah.
Nicely done.
I'm a nerd. Like,
yes, you are. But yeah, just you definitely feel like you're there. They do such a great. It's amazing what they can do today.
Yeah.
Those crazy computer people.
Right. Well, and I even loved how one thing they added to the show that's not in the books. It's just like in the backstory. Is this character named Logain? We're getting way off track here, but the false dragon, so the false Messiah.
Right. Yeah.
And they showed him taking over Gialdan and in this big war, and then he's using magic, basically the one power, but he's also going crazy because men can't use the male half of the one power. It turns them insane. And so just the way they showed that entire sequence, compared to the more. Compared to the female magic user, Moiraine, the kind of official, magic society, the Aes Sedai, and she's, going to war against these Trollocs, and that's really awesome.
Yeah.
But, both those scenes just kind of back to back were so powerful, visually speaking.
Yes. Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying.
And, people debated, should we even see this? Because, anyway, that's because of book reasons, but I thought that was really cool to see all that.
Oh, yeah.
Because you have to show things. Frankly, I get really bored by fantasy movies that there's magic power, but it's all invisible. And it's just someone squinting or like touching their finger to their forehead. I'm like, that's like the Spock mind meld thing, right? Like my mind to your mind.
Sure.
Like what's happening? I don't know. You're just like squinting.
No, I thought they did the magic really well.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love, all that stuff just visually is just amazing to me. I love it.
So when you see something that's beautifully done visually, whether that's a set piece or special effects or some artwork that you look at, what are some ways that points you to biblical truth or just something about God's character and nature?
Yeah. I mean, you think about what the Garden of Eden would have been like, and I'm sure it doesn't it's not actually going to be like that. It's going to be so much better in the future. But back when everything was perfect, Ned and me were hanging out. I can just see, like the God rays coming through the trees, like everything's glowing like it does in the Lord of the Rings.
I love that verse in Genesis where it says, the tree was good for food and pleasing to look at. He didn't have to make the second one,
Right.
Except he did.
Yeah.
Beauty is a need that we have. Otherwise, God wouldn't have put it into the world. It's an irreducible value. It's not just a thing we need for something else. It's something that we need at a core level. Makoto Fujimura has talked about that in his book, Culture Care. He tells the story of when he and his wife were young and newly married. They were on a very, very tight budget, and he's just trying to make ends meet, pay the rent, put food on the table, keep the lights on. And he comes home one day, and his wife had a vase of flowers on the table. And he's like, what are you doing? Why did you spend, $20 or whatever on those flowers? Like, we can't eat those.
Yeah.
And she said, but our souls need them.
Right.
Our soul needs beauty.
Yeah.
We're not just stomachs
Right.
that have to consume things. We're not just bodies that have to stay warm or not get too hot, not get too cold. We have souls.
Yeah.
We're a body and a soul.
Yeah. I mean, it feeds the soul. I live in Woodland Park, Colorado, and I'm fortunate enough to have a view of the mountains from my window. So I tend to wake up before my family. I've got 4 kids and 6 cats, and so it's kind of nice. Mornings are like my favorite time, and when the light hits Pikes Peak, just at that right moment, I'm like, oh, that's a good start to the morning.
Yeah. We take trips up to Colorado. I really love to see when there's clouds, but you can see the mountains right above the clouds.
Right. Yep.
I live in Austin, where we have hills. So we don't quite have mountains. We have a lot of natural beauty. But also the motto is keep Austin weird. So we have a lot of weird stuff. And sometimes you see, the beauty of human culture and creativity. And sometimes it's just trash or whatever, just weird things. But you also see a lot of music. You see a lot of really cool independent artists and just people trying to make something new and original. And just that impulse to create. Even in... Austin is not as churched of a city as like Dallas or Houston.
Right.
And yet there is that impulse to create.
Right.
To make things and to support others because God has put that desire for beauty in all of us.
Right.
So I think it's something inescapable, and I think it's something that actually God uses to draw people closer, because we start to wonder, why do I love beauty? Why do I love the sunrise? Why do I love green flowing hills instead of just concrete everywhere?
Right. Yeah, there's something innate in us.
Yeah.
And you think about, like C.S. Lewis, when he, speaking of wonder, from my understanding, his brother created some sort of little box and had something in it that was creative, and that stirred something in him as a child. And it's like, even as an older man, he was always chasing that feeling, like there was something beyond, the present, that it gave him kind of a taste of the eternal, and it was visual.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
So what have been some of the highlights for you at Realm Makers this weekend? I
got to teach a couple classes and done some mentoring, so this is like a lot busier than normal for me, so I'm not used to. I'm pretty much stuck in my house all day, which fits my personality. So this is really out of my comfort zone. So I don't know. I love coming here because this is like the one time in the year when I really socialize, and I feel like I'm an extrovert, even though I'm really not.
Right.
But man, there's so many things. Having young designers come up to me and say that they know my stuff, and I'm not trying to say like I've got a big head from it, but it's amazing that what I do in my little office, that other people are even aware of. So it's kind of weird to me, but it's inspiring too. Like, I guess I'm responsible a little more than I probably think about sometimes.
Yeah.
So it's neat to talk to young people, and they're asking me, well, how do I get into the business and all that, and divine intervention.
Yeah.
I really don't know how I got into it, to be honest.
I mean, that is a really wondrous thing, that you're creating something and you press a button on a computer and it goes somewhere.
Yeah.
And other people see it. And then those people that see it come in person to where you are in person, and you meet. And then you have this meeting of the minds, and you get to discuss art and design.
Yeah.
And what what that image meant to them and how it made them feel.
Yeah.
And just getting to hear that in person is so cool.
Yeah. I was just talking to a girl from New Zealand.
Oh, wow.
Like she came here specifically to be at Realmakers from New Zealand.
Oh, wow.
She was with
amazing.
her father. She's a teenager. I don't know how old she was, but and she's like aware of my art, which is really weird. So she took a photo with us in front of my booth.
I know.
So,
I mean, on kind of a different level, I've had a similar experience with just the podcast. I was standing in a group of people the other day, a few I knew, a few I didn't know. And one person finally, after a couple minutes, looked at my name tag and said, "Oh, you're Zach with the podcast. I listened to you. I recognized your voice."
Right.
I'm like, that's so strange.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't know I had a voice that people would, but of course, like, everyone is unique,
Right.
and we all have, these unique and individual contributions and artwork.
Yeah.
That it means something to someone else. Someone told me, and again, just this was so wonderful. Someone told me, I look forward all day Monday to your podcast on Tuesday. It gets me through
that's
Monday.
Fantastic.
I'm like, maybe that's why we are releasing on Tuesday, because Mondays are Mondays.
Yeah, they can be tough.
You need something to look forward to after a Monday.
Absolutely.
But it is just so fun to make that connection and go, okay, the work that I put into this was worth it.
Yeah.
And
Right.
just the toiling behind the scenes. With art, there's so much that goes on behind the scenes that no one ever sees.
Yeah.
To get to that finished product, someone said the other day, "Oh, your podcast is so smooth." I'm like, "Yeah, because you don't see all the outtakes." Yeah. And it's mostly me. It's mostly me editing stupid things out that I say.
Right. Well, hopefully you'll edit out some stupid things that I say.
No need. But yeah, it's like, okay, these are the moments when that's all worth it.
Yeah.
When you find that your work has made an impact on someone, it's like, okay, all that time I spent, all the studying I did, all the kind of perfecting of craft, hey, that was worth it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've thought a lot about Jesus' own ministry. You see such a small part of it. And that was only a small part of his life. And we don't see those other 30 years of his life except one moment when he's 12.
It's true.
And I always think about that. Like, why did God only show us part of that time? And, well, I mean, there's practical reasons, like there was no one following around with papyrus.
Right.
And that's really expensive anyway back in those times.
Right. We got to read the Apocrypha.
Yeah. Yeah. And then even within those 3 years, we just mostly see 1 week and just little scattered moments elsewhere.
Right.
But those were the moments that stood out, but those moments wouldn't have happened without all the other days. And I love how the Gospel of John ends, that if Jesus did many other things too,
right, they'd fill up
the entire world with books.
Right.
So, God has so many things going on all at once that we can only just get glimpses of. And, I wish I could talk to everyone here, but there's 400 people.
Right.
But God is telling so many stories and creating so many beautiful things through people here. It just boggles the mind sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So, what's the next thing you're looking forward to?
14-hour drive home.
Do you like road trips?
I do, actually. This might be a bit much. As I get older, it gets more difficult. But, I only do this once a year, so I really love it. I don't know. I was invited to go to Dragon Con.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So I don't know if I'm up for it. It's only like a month away.
Okay.
But, yeah, Clint Hall, who did Steal Fire from the Gods, he lives in Atlanta and invited me out, but I don't know.
That could
This
be
is
fun.
too much for my
Yeah.
body.
Well, that's probably a little bit longer drive to get to Atlanta.
That's
but-
well, I'd probably fly.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have this monster display to bring with me.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But this has been great. This might be my favorite Realm Makers, and I've been to 6 or 7 now.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, it's great to hear that, and it's good to hear that you're looking forward to the drive. I love road trips. I live in the middle of Texas, so it takes a whole day just to get out of Texas.
Yeah.
But I like driving through it, and you get to see more of God's creation that way. We live in such a big world
Yeah.
that it can feel really small just because of the internet.
Right.
But then meeting someone from New Zealand, wow.
Oh, I know.
And
Yeah.
just thinking about where that is and how would you even get there,
Yeah.
by any other means other than airplane.
Right.
It's just incredible to think about that now.
Yeah, it makes my little 14-hour drive nothing.
Well, I hope you got some good audiobooks or podcasts or something, but
Yeah. I listened to Maxine Justice. Have you heard of
okay.
that?
I just
Attorney at
bought the
Law?
book, yeah.
It is okay. It's really good. It's great. In fact, very entertaining.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, enjoy that. And Kirk, where can our listeners find you and your work?
My main design site is dogeareddesign.com or fictionartist.com as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll have that in the show notes. Thanks, Kirk.
All right. Thanks, Zach.
All right, I'm sitting down with Laura Van Arendonk Baugh. She just won the Realm Award for short fiction for her story Love My Neighbor. It's in the anthology Gilded Glass by Wordfire Press, edited by Kevin J. Anderson. Laura, tell us first, what is that story? What was it about?
The short version, it's the protagonist sees in the mirror every morning a different face that is a person that they will meet at some point during the day, and they work out that their mission, whether or not they choose to accept it, is to do something nice and neighborly. So, one person has forgotten their wallet, so they pay for their coffee, and just different things like that, very small, simple things. But, connecting with people. And then one day they look in the mirror in the morning and they see a skinhead looking back at them.
Wow, so that's intense. Not someone you normally see or would interact with.
And it's real hard to be like, hey, let me go find a way to be nice to this person. Yeah.
Have you heard of the story of Daryl Davis? Accidental Courtesy, I think was the name of the documentary about him.
I don't think so.
So he's an African-American that felt called to love the KKK.
Oh, yes, I do. Okay, I didn't
Yeah.
know the name, but I know the story.
Yeah.
Yes.
I may be getting a couple things wrong here, but essentially he would go meet individually with Klan members and try to talk them out of being in the Klan.
Right.
And when they would leave, he would ask them to give them their hoods or their whatever, Confederate flags, whatever it was that they would have.
Yeah.
And then he has a whole collection of them.
Yeah.
And there's dozens or hundreds of them that he's done.
It's amazing.
What would possess someone to go to people that hate you and try to talk love to them? That's incredible. So I love this story idea. It gives me also, I'm a huge Bill Murray fan, and I've seen Groundhog Day probably 1,000,000 times. So it reminds me of that.
Yes.
So I really like this. This is really fun. And I like that it's just looking in the mirror because you don't expect to see someone else in the mirror. You expect to see yourself.
Yeah. And that's where it starts the first time they see a different person.
Yeah.
They're like, am I hallucinating? What's going
Oh,
on? Yeah,
I like that.
yeah.
'Cause that's scary. That's, wait, why am I seeing that other person? So then they have to figure out who that person is just from an image.
Right.
So there's no other information.
No.
Oh, I like it. And so then it's a challenge. Who is that person and how do I find them? That's really cool. Well, congrats on winning the Realm Award.
Thank you.
So a big thing we have talked about today on the podcast is what has given people a sense of wonder. So this can be something in God's creation, something, some experience, story. What's something that has brought about that sense of wonder for you?
So this was not a super recent experience. It's been a few months ago at this point, but I had the opportunity to do a pilgrimage in Japan. I hiked a 1,000-year-old pilgrimage trail across the Kii Peninsula, the Kumano Kodo, which is the old roads of Kumano. So if you're familiar with the Camino de Santiago,
Yes.
That's a UNESCO recognized pilgrimage trail. The only other one on the planet is the Kumano Kodo.
Oh, wow.
So I spent a week hiking across this peninsula, across the mountains of Japan. There are 3 primary shrines for the 3 primary Shinto Kumano deities. And I arrived at the first one and went into the worship area, and we've got our primary deity things set up to honor. And then we get down to the end, and there's another little shrine house labeled, and I'm going to paraphrase, but the basic message is to the unknown God.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So that was pretty cool, just going through some amazing places with amazing history. The scenery is amazing. Japanese mountains are beautiful. And I had arranged my, a lot of gear was sent ahead, so I only had to day pack. I didn't have to, carry a week's worth of gear, which I have done. This is better. But again, this is the place that's been traveled for 1,000 years, over 1,000 years, and you can absolutely, get a sense of history and, the trail. You can tell. This is an extremely well-worn area. At one point you come out on the peak and you can see the Pacific Ocean, but I started on the other side of the peninsula, so
wow.
I've crossed the whole area.
I like this whole idea though of pilgrimages. I have a friend that went on the Camino. Just this whole idea of going on a journey through a place that others have gone before, but you don't see them.
Right.
But you know that they've gone there. It's sort of like that genre of fiction called Slipstream. Mm-hmm. It's like these 2 parallel timelines. They don't really cross each other, but they're experiencing kind of the same things in the same place, just not at the same time. It's a sense of wonder to have this experience that goes beyond yourself, that goes beyond even cultures and across time. So that's really cool.
So I'm going to not give the backstory, so it'll just be hilarious. I accidentally found myself in Athens, Greece, unplanned, and I was like, okay, I'm here anyway. I'm going to stop on the way to the airport and see the Acropolis because, I'm in Athens. I got one thing I can do. I'm going to do that. So I go and I'm walking around the Acropolis, and it's amazing, and all of these things. And I'm descending, and I just see a congregation of people, just a massive crowd of people that just keeps congregating in one area, and it's a kind of a raised, like if you imagine an enormous boulder, and I can look down on it from the Parthenon and Acropolis area, and I'm just like, okay, I'm going to walk over there and see. Like, obviously, a lot of people are going here for some reason. And I walk over, and there's not really any signage, and it's just people just keep walking up there and looking around and walking down. Maybe it's just a local sightseeing point, but there is a sign, but it's entirely in Greek, and Greek is not a thing that I do. and so I'm like, I'm just gonna hit Google Maps and just see if I can identify where I'm standing, just in case it's important. It was important. It was the Areopagus. Like a little known, and I was like, oh my gosh, okay, now I need to climb up and stand on the Areopagus and take photos and be like, dude, I'm on. Anyway, I was coming down, and I'm solo. I'm just traveling alone, and a man approaches me, and he's Greek, but he's speaking English, and he's like, do you know where you are? I'm assuming he didn't mean like Athens, even though that was a surprise to me. But I'm like, yeah, this is the Areopagus. He was, do you know why it's that why that's important? I'm like, yeah, Paul spoke here, and I'm going to go through it. It was funny because he was almost annoyed that I already knew. He was hoping to get to explain it, but it was really so cool to look at, and because I don't know, my Bible didn't come with accurate era photos, right, of things. So you think of Areopagus, you're like, okay, it's a raised area, it's a marketplace, it's something where people would be. No, it is literally just a giant rock that would actually make a fairly good pulpit, and it is rock throwing distance from the Parthenon. So it really set that whole scene in a very different thing. And I had a point when we started on how that related to what you were talking about, and then I just got excited, so now I'm lost.
Well, that's where Paul found the altar to the unknown God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And even though this Greek guy, didn't know me from Adam's off Ox or anything, but walking up and he's like, "Hey, random American stranger, do you know where you are?" And we were both excited about the location.
Oh, that's
So,
cool.
yeah.
That's so fun to get to experience that with someone from a different culture. And to think back, wow, Paul stood here
Yeah.
and gave that speech in Acts 17.
Yeah.
And then so many people heard the gospel for the first time, and just he delivered that great truth. He is not far from each one of us. And Paul goes into the life and death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, and to people that had no clue what this was about, but they wanted to hear more. And so it's just neat how those things can begin. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Laura. Congrats again on the award.
Thank you.
Okay, I am so excited to be joined here by Realm Award-winning author Brian Timothy Mitchell. He's the author of Infernal Fall, which is sort of an adaptation of Dante's Inferno. He's going to tell us about here in a minute. But Brian, welcome to the podcast. It's great to see you in person. We've obviously had some communication. You've sponsored the podcast, social media, all that stuff. But hey, we're here in person. So welcome, and it's great to see you.
Thank you. I am honored to be here. I love the show.
So you wrote a book about hell.
Yes.
So not a light subject.
No, not a light subject, but there's still a lot of hope.
Yeah.
Yeah, we all experience a little bit of hell in life sometimes. For some, it might be a long line at the grocery store. Sometimes it's coming back home from war with some things lingering on our minds. All kinds of different degrees, but there's always hope. So no matter what hell you're experiencing, there's a way out.
That's right. I love the verse in John 1 that says, "The light has shone in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." Because darkness cannot overcome light by its nature. Light always overcomes darkness. When I was growing up as a kid, I was not a believer until I was in high school, but I watched a lot of movies and cartoons and things about hell. One was the first exposure, I think, was Yosemite Sam going into hell from Bugs Bunny or something, and he just kind of shoots his way out. The other one was Bill and Ted, Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. Have you seen that?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, man. So they fall down the kind of infinite pit, and they're just screaming and falling, and then they just kind of stop and say, "You want to play 20 questions?"
Yeah.
And then they meet all these demons and all these really scary, kind of disturbing things. But then they meet the Grim Reaper and challenge into a game of "You Sunk My Battleship."
Yeah.
Best 3 out of 5, And then they beat him enough times that they get out of hell. I imagine the character in your book, that's not how he fights his way through hell.
No. In Dante's Inferno, he has Virgil who guides him, guides Dante the pilgrim. In this adaptation, Daniel has a less trustworthy guide. He has Heartless Charles, who's really a spirit who wants to be a demon, who wants to forget his humanity. The trick to getting out of hell for Heartless Charles is to go through and beg to the master of hell. That's his idea of escape, leaving humanity. But for Daniel, he doesn't know. He needs to learn. And what he discovers along the way is part of the issue with hell is everyone is prideful. They don't want to admit their sins. They don't want to leave that behind. They don't want to admit they made a mistake. It was everybody else's mistake. Whatever it was, whether it was lust, gluttony, greed, anger, all those indulgences, those earlier circles, it was everybody else's fault. Their pride keeps them down. That's why it's hard for people to escape that in life.
Yeah, I really like that. I think it's in Mere Christianity. C.S. Lewis talks about the nature of hell. And he says, imagine lots of individual campfires continually moving further and further apart because people look around and they don't trust the other people near them. And that's what hell is. It's this place of isolation. And that's why there's darkness, and that's why there's weeping and gnashing of teeth, because people are so obsessed with themselves, so untrustworthy and unresolved in their sin. Lewis said something really interesting. People in hell, they continue to sin. The restraining bolts have been removed. Because we hear in John 15 that the Holy Spirit has gone in the world to convince people of sin, righteousness, and judgment. So there is a restraining force now in the world, but in hell there will not be. And it's like you said, they continue to blame and not take responsibility because there's no repentance happening.
I remember reading in science how the stars are all going to fade one day. They know it's all going to go away one day. But light lives on. We're made of light. We are bioluminescent. We don't see our light. When we're in the dark, we don't see our hand shining. But God is with us. The Holy Spirit is in us. We are always going to shine, and we have that hope with us. Whenever we're in the darkest place, if we're in a bad neighborhood where people are getting shot, or you have bullies around you and you feel like there's no way out of these situations, you're going to work and you know that you need that paycheck, or you're going to lose your home, or you're not going to be able to feed your kids. Those are dark situations, but God is always with you. And it's amazing how we find ourselves in these corners and God somehow is with us and we help. We find help and we're able to get out of these dark situations. And all it takes is to let go of our pride. And that's what I really wanted to hammer home with this novel. Because Dante, in exploring the 9 circles of hell, he was really going on exploration on how to find God. That's why he went on to Purgatorio and on to Paradiso, his way to God, and going through sin and how we find him in this dark world. But I just feel when we find ourselves in these dark places, he's there with us already. And it just takes a moment of humility and just letting go of our selfishness and letting go of that pride and just reaching out and asking for help.
Yeah. Well, I love that you wanted to write these very positive themes through the vehicle of a horror, through a fantasy, but with horror elements, supernatural elements. There's a rich Christian history and tradition of horror as a genre because it shows ultimate good, ultimate evil. It shows, truly what sin leads to. It shows the full picture of the lack of redemption, the darkness that's possible, but ultimately good conquers that. God conquers evil. I think about Jonathan Edwards' sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. Not light reading.
No.
Not so inspirational, maybe, but extremely necessary. I mean, Jesus talked about hell. Let's just face it. We've talked on this podcast before about the purpose and nature of horror and how God uses horror. And I think God created the horror genre. We see a lot of, we won't rehash all that, but there are a lot of stories in the Old and New Testament that have horror elements to them. And God uses that to draw people to repentance, because sometimes the most horrifying thing is the blindness that people have towards God. And like you said, the pride that kind of suffocates us. And I've seen some just incredible sci-fi in my years. And again, this was, I guess, right around the time I became a Christian, but there's a sci-fi movie in the late 90s called Event Horizon. And it's about this spaceship that goes in search of other solar systems and galaxies, and it travels through a wormhole. But instead of going to Alpha Centauri, it goes literally into hell and brings something back. Yeah, and it's portrayed very. It's very terrifying. It's an R-rated horror movie, okay, but it's like they're not trying to sugarcoat what hell really is. Like very much the opposite. And I don't know if they're Christian filmmakers or not, but I think sometimes we need that because we live in a culture that doesn't like to think about the end of our lives. Yeah. Think about eternity. We're very now focused, instant gratification, pleasure, and pain relief oriented culture. I don't know why Dante wrote the original his original book. Do you know what kind of prompted him to write that?
He was thinking about writing an Arthurian legend, but he also had a lot of devotion to his faith, and he went that route. But one thing that I wanted to mention here is that we have to be brave. And sometimes we think of bravery as a way of being selfish. But sometimes it's also going out on a limb to speak the truth or help a neighbor or even ask for help. Sometimes we fear how that we'll be judged by someone by asking for help, or that we would be attacked for trying to correct someone. And I can understand why people would be afraid, but we are among the wolves. The apostles, they went among the wolves, and they knew what was going to happen. Well, maybe they didn't know exactly what was going to happen, but they knew there was real danger in spreading that truth. And we have to have that same kind of bravery. Yeah. We have to face the darkness, or the darkness it's not going to stop. We're the light of the world. God sent us out.
I love it. Well, last question, something we've been asking everyone today. At Realmakers, we've talked a lot about wonder. So what is something that's brought you a sense of wonder?
Oh, God speaks to us that small voice. This is a hard story to tell. My mom used to practice Wicca. She was a Christian, but she went down a hard road and she fell into that world of Wicca. And I stayed a Christian, and we had these long, hard conversations. She wanted me to go into Wicca. I wouldn't leave Christianity. I felt really close to Jesus, and she felt like, she got me started on the church too early, and she wanted me to not feel like I was pushed into that. But over time, after years of conversation with her, she just calls me on the phone one day. I believe in God. Jesus is the Lord. And the way that she used to talk about things, about discerning spirits and making spells and protecting me with different spells while I was in Iraq, I just she's going to have another wild story to tell. So it's so what happened? What made this change? She said she looked out a window and she saw that the world was beautiful. She saw the sun was shining, the kids were playing in the yard, and she said to herself, only God can make a day this beautiful. It's to me at the time, it was that's all? That's all it took? All these years we've been talking about this, and you look out a window and she's yeah. And I didn't realize at the time, there's a little bit of pride in me at that point, because God just did a little bitty thing and changed her mind. But one day I was on the way to college. I've already been in the military. I hated being late. I was running late. And I needed to get over in the left lane to turn to get to school faster. But no one would let me over. I was mad. I was hitting the steering wheel. I may have had some colorful words at that point in time. But then out of nowhere, I just say, there's a better way. I said it out loud to myself. Then I get to thinking deeply. There is a better way. I don't need to be angry. I don't need to worry about what's going to happen with my test or my classes. I can be late. I will still live. God is with me. There's a better way. And that stuck with me the whole day. Years of college. I got a master's in computer science with a language arts degree as well. That day sticks with me. That moment sticks with me more than anything else in my years in college.
Yeah.
God taught me more in that moment than years of college. And then I finally realized what my mom experienced in that moment. There's a haze that just kind of stayed with me that day. I went through my classes, I went through the motions, but I was just in awe that whole day. And I know we all have those moments, and I experience it here at Railmakers. Sometimes it's watching TV. It's just something happens on TV, as weird as that is. God works with us
Yeah.
all the time, and all we have to do is open our eyes and see. He's always calling for us.
You know, that reminds me of the verse that says, his kindness leads us to repentance. And isn't that great when that is what turns us around? Because that's the easy way, right? You know, and praise God for how your mom turned around from that pleasant experience of seeing his creation. I think C.S. Lewis talks about this in the Screwtape Letters, how one demon says to the other demon, oh, don't let your patient go for a walk. Don't let him read a book that he actually enjoys. Don't let him have these simple pleasures, because that's the enemy's territory, God's territory. God puts so many wonderful things in the world for us to enjoy and to taste and see that he is good. For a minute there, I thought what you were going to tell me about your mom was how the folks in Acts 19, the story they went through. So in that, it's one of my favorite stories in the Bible. These would-be exorcists try to get rid of a demon who overpowers them and strips them naked and wallops them. And then the story of that failed exorcism, these guys said, hey, we're here in the name of Paul, we're here in the name of Jesus who Paul preaches. And the demon says, well, I don't know who you are, but I know who Paul is, and I definitely know who Jesus is. And they didn't really believe it. They just tried to use it like magic words. But the story of how that went about, that made everyone afraid. And that fear led to a fear of God in a healthy way. And it led to a worship of Jesus. And sometimes God takes people through those hard lessons. But sometimes it's through a pleasant lesson. People don't have to go through hell for everything. God takes us through beautiful and wonderful places. And it's great to hear how you've experienced some wonder here at Realmakers and just in other times in your life. So thanks for joining us today. And congratulations again on the Realm Award.
Thank you, Zach. I'm honored to be here. Thank you so much.
Stephen, how amazing to get to talk to these authors. We've only scratched the surface here because there's, like you said, about 500 people here at Realmakers 2023. So I wish we had time to talk to many more of them, but I'm sure in the months ahead we'll get to talk to several more authors that we've met here and have books coming out. Going back to something Steve Lobby said in an opening keynote, which you mentioned, I love how he said that wonder is the amazement we feel when we come across something inspiring, when our senses are overwhelmed, and when our focus is sharpened. And he said this in contrast to kind of the modern day ethos, which is to just keep our bodies well fed and entertained. That seems to be all that matters. So much entertainment nowadays is just junk food. But what we are seeing through Realmakers is stories that are truly nourishing and a very well-balanced diet. They're full of wonder because they overwhelm our senses. They go beyond just light and fluffy, kind of things, or just the algorithmic feed that we are seeing from many of the streaming giants. These are stories that are handcrafted, that people put a lot of care into, that they really want to use to reflect God's creativity. Steve Lobby's talk made me think of Romans 1, where it says, his divine power and attributes have been seen through what has been made. Now, obviously, Paul is talking about the natural creation, things like the ghost trees in Namibia. But I also think about that through human creativity, that God's divine power and attributes are being seen through the stories that are being told.
And I see that so much among the folks that we got to talk to at the Lorehaven booth, right here in the vendor hall. We always have our Lorehaven booth at every Realmakers we can get to, which right now is all of them, and a lot of great allies surrounding us, but a lot of folks stopping by who are fans of the podcast. So if you're a fan of the podcast and we got to talk to you at the conference, thank you so much for your encouragement. It does take a lot of work even to get this little weekly show out, but we love it, and we love connecting with all of you. And to all the folks who hadn't heard of Lorehaven before, welcome on board. It's fantastic to get to meet you at the conference, and we hope that you'll enjoy, hopefully, maybe not listening to all 170 episodes, but hey, Listen to all 170 episodes. And if you can't get back before the 100th episode on your podcast feed, you can find them all at lorehaven.com. We have them all perma-posted at lorehaven.com/podcast. If you haven't subscribed to Lorehaven as well, you get more than the podcast. You get the articles about every month or so. You get the weekly reviews as well as the Tuesday podcast episodes and news, including that news story about the Realm Award winners. You can see not only the winners there, but the nominees, some photos going on. We are exiting conference mode now, so I think we took the week off from reviews last week, but we'll be getting back to that as soon as we can. You can subscribe free to get those updates, as I mentioned, but also to join the Lorehaven Guild. That's our exclusive Discord community, about 250 heroes on there, not talking all at once, though, so it's a very welcoming place, very secure, very biblically formed there, and we're still doing a book quest through the month of July through Kathy McCrum's science fiction novel, Recorder. It's not too late to jump on there. Elijah David is leading that quest. Next on Fantastical Truth, great stories, as we have mentioned, should lead us to a sense of wonder. But lately, some stories that don't do that are not doing very well at the box office. And meanwhile, as we mentioned earlier, writers and actors, as we record, have gone on strike for various reasons. But among them, they're objecting to the streaming service revenue platform and to this notion that AI might cheat them out of their livelihoods as human beings. Well, Scripture does warn against employers oppressing their employees, whether it's a business or a vocational ministry or a creative business. So, how do Christian fans honor the value of stories and show our appreciation for the creators who work so hard to reflect God's image as they are making these things that should bring us wonder? Meanwhile, maybe you didn't feel wonder this week. Maybe you didn't get to go to Realm Makers. Maybe it's been hard. It's not always going to be a sense of wonder 24/7, but what a blessing it is when the wonder that God has put in the world and the wonder of his redemptive work in the gospel can bring us that feeling. I pray that you would not chase the feeling, but that you would chase Jesus. And as a surprise bonus, every once in a while, just feel your emotional spirits lift so that you can feel motivated to praise him as we continue to seek and find his fantastical truth.